back like we never left. It's Double Move Sports. I'm Stef Albiero, aka Big Baby Stef. We got the fantasy phenom Alex Lott up in here today. And it's time to do some value checks for some of these redraft names. There's a lot of questions coming up in our Discord channel. If you have questions on players, you have your own takes you want to drop, hit that free Discord link in the description of our videos. But Alex, we need to talk about 4 running backs and really the whole RB dead zone on the show today. You ready to jump into it? Because I'm going to have some spicy takes locked and loaded.
Yeah, I'm excited. And you mentioned it, hop in that Discord. If you're gearing up for your fantasy football season, we're there with our community all season long, helping you with draft questions, start sits. Trades are my personal favorite to look through some of these rosters and get out of dynasty mode back into redraft mode. But this is going to be fun, Steph, because I think this year there is that top tier running backs, and there are so many of these guys in the middle that are polarizing. Some people view them as extreme value. Some people would not touch them with a 10-foot pole, even in the middle rounds, even when some of them are 2-3 rounds later than they were going even last year. So these are the kind of names that can make or break your draft. Obviously, you can always make up for it if you are wrong about these guys. But if you can hit on a couple of these names and pick the right ones in these later rounds, that's how you get extreme value in your leagues. So, Steph, let's hop into it with our first running back on this list.
Yeah, first one we have here, RB17 off the board right now on Underdog. So we can presume in home leagues, maybe going a little bit later, maybe a little bit earlier. But in general, any redraft league or mock that you run right now, you're going to see Breece Hall go in the 4th round. And really the question is he worth it at that draft slot? And the way I'm viewing Breece Hall this year is the same way we view Jonathan Taylor as a rookie, DeAndre Swift as a rookie, Javonte Williams last year, where they're these high upside. Ideally, your RB3 in a robust RB build, maybe RB2, and you try to scrape by later on down the draft board. Go for some of the names we're going to talk about later at the dead zone, like Chase Edmonds, like James Cook, Ramondre Stevenson. We'll get there. But Breece Hall is a guy that I love to take in the 4th round, especially in a robust RB build, because he will give you that upside down the stretch. Because what we see with rookie running backs is a ease into their usage and volme in the first year. That's typically what we see. Now, there have been outliers as recently as last year. Najee Harris got 300 carries on the ground, 90-plus targets, ridiculous volume from week 1. So we could see that from Breece Hall. I'm not expecting it, but he's been looking great in camp. He's been breaking out big runs. He looks explosive. And you and I both loved him as a prospect, clear 101 in dynasty redraft leagues in all formats, or dynasty rookie drafts in all formats, I should say. Alex, are you with me on this Breece Hall value at RB17?
I'm all in, man. And it's one of those picks that feels like, barring injury, just based on the talent of the player and the opportunity we expect him to work up to throughout the season, it feels like there is just so much more upside to this pick than downside. And you said it. I think Breece is a player that probably the back half of the season is going to benefit your roster more than he might in weeks 1 through 6. I mean, right now, they just lost Mekhi Becton off the offensive line. They're figuring out some answers there. Zach Wilson is injured. He could miss a couple weeks to start the season. Say what you want about Zach Wilson or Mike White or Joe Flacco being best for the roster, but when there is that quarterback turnover and that swirl, the offense can look a little bit different. You've got Garrett Wilson, who's going to be getting ramped up. So there's a lot of changes to this team. But I think as we work through the season, not only because he's a rookie running back, but because there's going to hopefully be some stability in the Jets offense, whether it's good or bad as the season goes along, we should see more consistent workloads for Breece Hall. And what I do love about Breece is that he does give you, one, the big play ability. He can break, a 70-yard run to the house. I just saw a highlight this morning from camp of him breaking that big run to the house, which was awesome to see. But 2, he gives you talent as a pass catcher. He is a more than capable pass catcher. He wasn't necessarily featured that way at Iowa State. Yes, Michael Carter is there as a pass catcher, but when you look at a guy like Jonathan Taylor has Nyheim Hines in Indy, who is this running back that profiles as a pass catcher. Honestly, Hines is better at that role than Michael Carter is at this point in their career. Jonathan Taylor, yes, is a more premier talent with everything we know than Breece Hall, but Breece has got the speed, he's got the pass catching ability, and Jonathan Taylor in Indy is not primarily used as a pass catcher, but he certainly gets that done as part of his game. He's not this Nick Chubb type player who's getting, 1.5 targets per game throughout the course of the season. Even Jonathan Taylor last season, we see him getting three targets a game on the year. Some games he was getting 4, 5, 6 receptions. So I think Breece Hall can come in, make big plays happen. Yes, there might be some inefficiencies in New York, but the talent is going to win out in that situation. And Michael Carter does not scare me one bit. So he might not finish the season as a top 5 running back because he ramps up slower. But if he is your running back 3 on a robust RB roster, or he's even your running back 2 when you're stacking up on these receiver talents as well, he's just perfect right now at ADP going in that 4th or 5th round.
Yeah, and shout out to everybody who was rocking with us during the rookie season. We did pre-prospect breakdowns prior to the draft. We adjusted things after the draft once we had landing spots and draft capital on these players. But with Breece Hall, he had a clear 3-down workhorse profile coming out of Iowa State. He was an early declare, clean injury history, played all 12 games, all 3 years of college, over 1,100 yards from scrimmage, absolutely dominant as a true freshman. That went back-to-back seasons as Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, over 1,400 rushing yards his last 2 years, over 1,750 scrimmage yards those 2 years, 23 touchdowns his last 2 years in college. And what we love to see is that he improved efficiency on the ground every year. He took on more passing work over time. He caught 36 receptions as a junior in those 12 games. And interesting stat on Breece, rushed for a touchdown in his final 24 games, broke the NCAA all-time record for consecutive games with a rushing touchdown. So there's literally 0 holes in Breece Hall's college production. And then you look at his athleticism, his side and speeds. He checks every box. His BMI is fantastic, 5'11", 217. That is prototype size. The high-end comps that you and I had throughout the rookie process were Melvin Gordon, who's 6'1", 215, and Dalvin Cook, who's 5'10", 210. But the low-hanging fruit comp has always been David Montgomery because he also went to Iowa State, was also a 3-down workhorse. We're going to talk about Monty here next, but David Montgomery plus is a great way to think about Breece Hall. 5'10", 222 pounds for David Montgomery, but ran a 4.63 40-yard dash. When you look at Breece Hall, where he makes his hay over David Montgomery is the explosive plays. Breece ran a 4.39, just like Jonathan Taylor did, just like a guy we're going to talk about later, and Antonio Gibson, who's being criminally underrated right now. But you have to love Breece Hall at this spot. He's one of the best prospects we've seen, and it's interesting on how many rosters I go with the double New York workhorse running backs with Saquon Barkley in the 2nd, Breece Hall in the 4th, and feel really good going down those middle rounds, just smashing on receiver, then circling back on running back at the very end. But just 2 spots in ADP below David Montgomery. And I think these guys are worlds apart. At RB19, Monty out of Chicago is being taken right now. In some drafts, I'm seeing him go ahead of Akers, ETN, even our boy Breece Hall. I just don't see the ceiling that those guys have. Before I start roasting Monty, Alex, what are your thoughts on, one, this RB19 ADP, because it is lower than last year, but also in Monty's situation as overall?
Yeah, Monty, it's tough, and I just don't find myself drafting him very often because, you already mentioned it, but the upside just feels so low. It's situationally, it's honestly a mess for me because the offensive line is terrible in Chicago. Their defense is going to be awful, so they're going to get in these game scripts where they're throwing the ball or being forced to throw the ball. Justin Fields in the offense is unproven. They could be like a bottom 3 offense in terms of points scored this year. I hope they're not, because that means Justin Fields stepped up. But based on the roster they have, they are not helping Justin Fields at all. So this could be one of the worst offenses in the NFL. So when I think about that touchdown upside for Monty, it's low. The big play potential is low. He's not a fast, explosive player. Even last season, 9th in the NFL in terms of rushing attempts, but he was down at 19th in terms of runs for 20 or more yards. So he's not a player that gets these big chunk gains very frequently. And while he is a capable pass catcher, and we've seen that piece of his skill set before, it's certainly not where he specializes. And with Justin Fields being a mobile quarterback as well, we've seen tendencies over time for NFL quarterbacks. If they are a mobile quarterback, they have tendencies not to throw and check down to the running backs as often. So with David Montgomery, I don't hate him as a player. I think he's a good player. He's a fine player. He's a solid running back. whatever you want to say. But I just think the situation, kind of with Breece Hall, who we just talked about, his situation and his talent, where his ADP is as well, there's tons of room for upside, barring injury. And I don't see a ton of room for downside. With David Montgomery, I kind of think it's the opposite. I think there is tons that could go wrong, and the bottom could fall out. Khalil Herbert is there, and he's a very capable player. And with a new coaching staff, it could be more of a 1A, 1B split. And for Montgomery at his ADP, I just don't think there's a whole lot of upside. So I don't want to draft a player close to his ceiling that's not going to win me a league. And it's not that I hate him if he falls 2-3 more rounds. Like, I'll be happy to scoop him up as a depth piece, as a running back 3 on my roster. But he's just not someone I'm targeting in drafts. And I tend to find myself going, there's running backs I like more at his ADP. There's quarterbacks I like in that range in the middle rounds that are values. And there's a ton of receivers still on the board that I like more than Montgomery as well. So this is just another reason why I love going running back early, because once you get to this Montgomery range, it doesn't feel good taking him over some of the upside players that are out there at other positions. And if you pigeonhole yourself into having to take a running back, you might be stuck with an option that you don't like.
Yeah, the Monty situation, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's brutal in every way other than the fact that they just like to run the ball a lot in Chicago, because they were a bottom 10 O-line per PFF last year. The weaponry is horrible. And I see people getting excited on our Discord and on Twitter about Luke Getsy, the former Packers OC that they brought in, that Matt Eberflus brought in with this new regime in the front office and the coaching staff in Chicago. I just don't know what to think about Luke Getsy, right? How much of the Packers' offensive efficiency was Aaron Rodgers, was Devontae Adams? Like, are we going to give Luke Getsy all the credit from the Rodgers-Adams stack that he's had there for the last 5 years in Green Bay? So I'm not saying he's bad. I don't think we've seen anything to say that he's not competent or capable, but people are looking at Luke Getsy as this whole new breath of fresh air that's going to be the next Sean McVay, and the Packers are going to be an amazing offense. I just don't see that at all. There's nothing to fall back on Getsy's resume as far as him personally that I can really like hang my hat on and be like, yep, we're absolutely going to see a meteoric rise for the Bears this year. And Khalil Herbert last year showed exactly why drafting David Montgomery he's the case study for just a volume-based floor play, because we saw Khalil Herbert start in 3 games last year, week 6 to 8. This is a 5-year college player, a 6th-round pick, and he averaged 90 yards a game on 20 carries a game.
He looked good.
Per game. 4.5 yards per carry for Khalil Herbert. That's same as David Montgomery, who hasn't passed that mark in a season-long stat line yet in his career. So it's not that I don't think Monty will get volume, but there's just very little ceiling compared to guys going around him. I don't see a path to 20 touchdowns like an Ezekiel Elliott, like even a J.K. Dobbins or Josh Jacobs, which is a whole nother conversation on Jacobs. And then multiple rounds down the board, there's names that have more upside on a week-to-week basis because of their offenses, because of their skill sets, like Elijah Mitchell, A.J. Dillon, Tony Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson, Chase Edmonds. So why take Monty there when the ceiling plays like Breece, Akers, Etienne could be these explosive playmakers in even bad offenses like Saquon Barkley's done? So I'm typically going with a Cortland Sutton, Mike Williams, DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson at that David Montgomery ADP, back of the 3rd, early 4th. And for me, now is the time to sell Monty in Dynasty, because you don't want to be stuck holding the bag on a running back who's past the age 25 apex, isn't projected to get a second contract, doesn't have an extension right now. He's going into this contract year when a whole new regime just came into Chicago. So there's no loyalty. There's no, hey, we got to get our value to this guy. And in Dynasty, this opens up a whole other conversation, because without that big contract, there's far less of an incentive for you to get the touches. You see how guys like Zeke, Dalvin Cook, Kamara, Mixon, they have these big second contracts that make them these volume monsters, and they build the offenses around those players. On the flip side, if you don't get a second contract, or even like a Melvin Gordon or a Leonard Fournette, 2-3-year deal, we've seen the path play out in recent years with guys like Tevin Coleman, guys like Jay Ajayi, Jeremy Hill, Jordan Howard, Isaiah Crowell, the guys who can be 3-down backs and showed flashes, but not enough to get to that $6 to $7 million a year guaranteed deal that we're seeing Aaron Jones get, Melvin Gordon get. So the ceiling outcome for Monty, in my eyes, is James Conner from a contract perspective, who got the $4.5 million a year guarantee, but James Conner's 2 years older and still falling down draft boards even after a phenomenal season. So I know a lot of people are high on Monty. I'm essentially all the way out, especially in dynasty formats.
So, Steph, let's move on to our next player in this kind of running back dead zone. Another one where in our Discord especially, that's where I seem to get a pulse on who are the players that people are talking about. And J.K. Dobbins has been brought up maybe more than any other running back. He and Antonio Gibson, who are the last two guys we're going to talk about, are two of the most polarizing players in fantasy. And with Dobbins, I don't think anyone doubts the talent, but he's coming back from the ACL. We don't know how ready he is. We haven't seen this Baltimore offense with healthy running backs in 2 years. Steph Dobbins currently going in the 5th round as the running back 21. I know we both are more in on him in Dynasty as more of a long-term play, but for redraft here in 2022, that's what we're talking about today. Where are you on J.K. Dobbins, and are you willing to take him at running back 21 right now in these drafts?
The concern is the injury, right? Coming off the ACL, missed his his entire second year in the league. So certainly we don't get another sample size that we can look at. We don't have a robust resume for Dobbins in the NFL. But I think the 5th round ADP does bake in maybe a limited ceiling that he's going to have from the lack of receiving work, but also a slow ramp up. So he's off the PUP list. He got off the PUP, which was a huge milestone that Dobbins needed to hit before the season. Right now, the Ravens are saying he's not a lock for week 1, but he's close. And I think that's a very positive sign. We saw him finish as a low-end RB2 as a 2nd-round NFL draft pick as a rookie. He was on that Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift path. He just missed last year with the ACL. So what I do like about Dobbins, one that, hey, he's been the most heavily invested running back in that draft room in Baltimore. But then also you have Gus Edwards questionable for week 1. Mike Davis, they brought him in as just a depth piece. They have Tyler Beatty, a 6th-round flyer that you and I loved as a prospect. He's undersized, explosive, runs like a madman, and we saw him carry a Mizzou offense in the SEC with over 1,600 rushing yards, 54 receptions, 18 touchdowns in 12 games. And then Justice Hill is still there. So while there is some exciting pieces, maybe even some streaming names that we get into down the stretch, we could see Beatty pop into like a Ravens RB2 or 1B role down the stretch if more injuries happen. But I like the fact that Dobbins doesn't have this monster mountain to climb on the depth chart. When he's fully healthy, ready to go, I think he's going to be seeing a 70% plus snap share, and that's what we want to see. If Gus Edwards was coming in ready to go for week 1 and Dobbins was not, I'd have a lot more hesitation. But I think the 5th round ADP makes him kind of like a value like Breece Hall, where you're banking on him to get fully into form by the end of the season, who can be that name that puts you over the edge at running back when a lot of the names that people were drafting in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd round are injured, they aren't playing. You're able to wait a couple rounds, get Dobbins in the 5th or ideally the 6th. My rule this year is if Dobbins falls to the 6th in a 12-team PPR redraft league, I'm smashing on him all day. Sometimes he'll go in the 5th round. I think that's fine because that drop of multiple rounds for Dobbins bakes in kind of a slow ramp up like we saw from Saquon last year. And if we continue to see a limited ceiling without the passing game work that's talked about so much whenever Dobbins is analyzed for fantasy. So, Alex, are you with me on being comfortable at that RB21, 5th, 6th round for Dobbins?
No.
Really?
Not at all. I like Dobbins in Dynasty. I think long-term he's going to be a solid asset, but I just struggle to take him right now in that 5th, 6th round. Running back 21, I just fail to see the upside this year for J.K. Dobbins because similar to a lot of players we talk about, Dobbins is a more than capable pass catcher. Even as a rookie, when he was given opportunities in the receiving game, he did well with them. And we even saw that at Ohio State. But Lamar Jackson just straight up does not throw the ball to the running back position. This is year after year after year of a sample size where J.K. Dobbins is going to get 1.5 targets per game. And in these PPR leagues, that's just not going to stack up to some of these other running backs, even getting 3-4 targets per game, giving you that higher floor. So one, the receiving work is a concern, but the case for J.K. Dobbins, which I'll acknowledge, is the yards per carry. I mean, he's 6 yards per carry as a rookie. Gus Edwards is consistently over 5 through the 3 healthy seasons he's had in his career. And we've seen the Baltimore Ravens in this scheme with Lamar Jackson in 2019 and 2020, when they had healthy running backs, were number 1 in the NFL in yards per carry. So even last year, they were in the top 10 in yards per carry with Le'Veon Bell and Devontae Freeman at running back. So, like, this is a team that is going to be efficient with the carries. So 200 carries for J.K. Dobbins is worth a lot more than for David Montgomery, for example. So I do think the efficiency will be there. And even if Gus Edwards is back by week 5 or 6, J.K. Dobbins week 1, 2, 3 might have a slow ramp up. By the time he's ready to go, Gus Edwards might be ready for his slow ramp up period. And I just think Gus Edwards is going to continue to be involved and continue to be a thorn in J.K. Dobbins' side, both in goal line situations. Even if he's taking 6, 7, 8 carries per game, that is going to take away from J.K. Dobbins' upside. And of course, you have Lamar Jackson, who is going to have his fair share of rushing touchdowns as well. So with Dobbins, he just doesn't have the receiving upside. I don't think he's going to be a 300 carry player. I don't think he's going to get to 250. He might be in that 200 to 225 range in terms of carries. So for Dobbins, what you have to have happen is what happened with Mark Ingram a couple of years ago in Baltimore. He had a ridiculous over-indexing in touchdowns and ended up as the RB11. Mark Ingram had 5 receiving touchdowns on only 26 receptions and had 10 rushing touchdowns on only 200 carries back in the 2019 season. So for J.K. Dobbins, you are banking on him getting like 15 to 20 touchdowns with limited touches. And I just don't want to bank on that from my running back, my RB2 potentially, even RB3. There are other guys in this range that I would prefer more. Like, why would I take J.K. Dobbins when I could wait around and take Elijah Mitchell or A.J. Dillon? That I just don't understand. Maybe you argue the talent, but situationally, I'd probably rather have either of the other guys in terms of what the offense brings to the table and in terms of the touchdown upside and possible receiving workload as well. And there's less injury concerns for those guys not coming off of an ACL. So it's not that I hate Dobbins as a player. I think he's the most talented of all the guys I just mentioned. I just think the situation from a fantasy perspective leaves a lot to be desired. But I think for the Baltimore Ravens, he's going to be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and the cheap pass, the upside for him is taking over the Ravens backfield and just being the guy they give all the carries to, which you kind of talk through why you don't see that happening. I think I'm in a little bit more on Dobbins being able to take over that 18 carry a game type workload.
He's never had more than 15 in a game in his career. And in that game, Gus Edwards had more.
In a rookie with Mark Ingram still there, I'm not going to overreact to that, but I definitely see the concerns. And then you look at his efficiency, even as a pass catcher. And Harbaugh keeps saying, hey, we got to get Dobbins more involved in the receiving game. We got to get him more involved, but I'm not going to over-index on coach speak. So let us know in the comments who you'll agree with more. Are you more in on Dobbins at cost like I am? Are you out like Alex is? But it always is shady when there's injury concerns going into week 1 because injuries are just a weird thing that we can't predict, and it creates some unknowns that if you can offload that risk to somebody else, I think that's a fine move. But let's talk about Antonio Gibson. RB22 right now. RB22 was going in the 3rd round in early underdog drafts that were happening like the month after the Super Bowl before the draft. Somehow Brian Robinson is like a last round pick and Gibson has fallen to the 6th round in fantasy redraft leagues right now. And I got to say, I'm buying him everywhere. I'm sending 2nd round picks for him in Dynasty because I'm willing to bet on good players, even in bad situations. And this has been my sticking point on Leonard Fournette every year of his career when everyone told me he's fat, he's slow, he's on the worst team in the league, the Jacksonville offensive line is terrible, Gardner Minshew's the quarterback. Who cares? Just bet on good players, even if they're in bad situations. And I'm going to go back to that well again because Gibson last year was an RB2 in fantasy points per game. Also was as a rookie in both years playing through injury. He had double-digit touchdowns both seasons. Last year he was top 5 in evaded tackles, top 10 in opportunity share, breakaway run rate, yards per route run, super efficient, had over 1,000 rushing yards, was 6th in the NFL in rushing yards. I just don't see a path other than just continuous fumbles time and time again. I know the fumbling has been a thorn in Gibson's side. I think at this point it's clear that he knows it's a problem and he needs to work on it. Hopefully he's showing his coaches in camp right now that he can do that because it does seem like he is getting a little bit doghoused, right? They're putting him out there with special teams. He's running with the 2s. But I'm not going to overreact to 2 weeks of camp. And other than like fumbling, doghouse, Ronald Jones type situation, I don't see a path to where Gibson's getting below a 50% snap share because he is the best running back that they have on that roster. Okay, J.D. McKissic has never been a fear factor for me ever with Gibson. He's now 29 years old. He's an undersized scat back. He missed 6 games last year, already dealing with groin issues in camp and missing practice. And then Brian Robinson. Okay, what Brian Robinson has going for him is that he's big and he has soft hands. And that's about it. He wasn't super efficient in college. He can truck guys. He can break tackles, but he isn't explosive as a rusher. Think of him as like a worse A.J. Dillon or a poor man's Najee Harris. He needs volume to be a consistent fantasy producer. And when Washington drafted Brian Robinson, my initial reaction, I think yours too, Alex, was it was a bad pick for the roster, one, because they had so many other needs. But they burned a third-round pick on a replacement for the Peyton Barber, Jarrett Patterson role because they've been worried about Gibson playing through the shin injury last year and wanted to essentially button up the RB depth, not necessarily to start Brian Robinson over Gibson. And that's the way people are treating his ADP.
Steph, it's tough. And, I'm glad we agreed on some players earlier because I fundamentally disagree with you on all of the reasons you're not worried for Antonio Gibson. You mentioned the fumbling, right? Like he led the league in fumbles at the running back position last season. This has been a problem for him. And what happens in their first preseason game? He fumbles on their first drive. And then he gets benched and comes back in with the backups. And then that's the week where we hear he's playing on the punt team. Like, why would your starting running back ever be practicing with the punt team? You don't doghouse someone by doing that because that's a waste of reps for the guys that need it. So the fumbling is a problem. And I get he's an incredibly talented player, but the bottom line in the NFL is if you fumble the football, you're not going to be on the field. Brian Robinson is good enough. He's not as good as Antonio Gibson. He's not even close. Neither is J.D. McKissic. But if they don't fumble the ball, it might change the coaching staff's mind on who they want on the field because that's not wasted possessions for the team. And honestly, when you get in your own head about fumbling, that's all you're thinking about. And then the defense knows you are a fumble monster, so they're going to be ripping the ball. So it is a little bit cyclical, and it can get in your head. I hope he gets over that. But two, Brian Robinson, whether we think he was a good pick or not in the draft, we see this all the time, he was a day 2 pick. We preach on day 2 being what you've got to get at the running back position to increase your hit rate, to increase your chance of making an impact. Whether it was the right pick or not, Brian Robinson went on day 2 to Washington, and he's a good player. He put up good production at Alabama. He was buried on that roster behind all of the other amazing Alabama running backs that have come into the league over the past several years. Najee Harris, Josh Jacobs, the list goes on and on. But he's a good player, and he's going to come in. He's got this goal line stature, this goal line back stature, where if he even takes 3, 4 touchdowns away from Antonio Gibson, there goes some of that upside. So I do think Brian Robinson's going to make an impact on, even if he takes a drive here and there, if he gets a couple touchdowns here and there, that's going to take away from Gibson's upside. And third, J.D. McKissic, I don't think McKissic's that good either. He's a scat back. He's undersized. He's not a threat to take over. And if Gibson went down, McKissic's value probably stays the same. But the truth is, J.D. McKissic is a big piece of this offense. J.D. McKissic affects Antonio Gibson's usage in the passing game. Last season, Gibson was averaging 2.5 targets per game when McKissic was active, and he had about a 6-game sample size with McKissic inactive, and that 2.5 targets per game went up to 4.5 targets per game, and that's where we saw some of that upside coming at the end of the season. So whether McKissic's good or not, it does impact Gibson's upside. So all these different factors are limiting what Antonio Gibson can be, talented or not. I just don't think he's going to get the opportunity. I do think the Washington offense should be a little bit better this year. Bringing in Jahan Dotson, Carson Wentz should be an upgrade at quarterback. Take that however you want. But I'm worried about Antonio Gibson. But I'll say this. I'll give you this. There was a time when Gibson started free falling and he fell back to round 4, round 5. And I'm like, okay, like I'm still probably out on him. I'm a little bit worried about the upside. Then he falls to round 6. I'm like, okay, I'm probably not taking him in round 6, but I'm willing to take him if he falls a little bit further. And then I'm sitting there this morning, literally this morning, in an underdog best ball draft, and I got Antonio Gibson in the 9th round. So It's not to say that I'm out on Antonio Gibson. I think he's a super talented player. I'm worried about him for a lot of different reasons. That makes me prefer other guys around his ADP. But if he falls around 7, 8, 9, give me that value all day because we see this every year. Some of these camp stories there's some legitimacy to him. Some of them, the player busters out and he's, his career is over. But then sometimes it's a complete wash. Like Jamar Chase couldn't catch last year, right? For all of training camp, people were out on Jamar Chase because he was having drop issues. Like we see this every year, and more often than not, it's all just coach speak. It's all just narrative based. And we could get to week one and Antonio Gibson could just be a 250 carry, 50 target running back again and end up as an RB1. Like it's possible. And I'm willing to take the bet and the chance on that in round 7, 8, 9, but in round 6 and above, there's too many question marks for me to take him over some of the names in that range.
I'm glad you see the upside because that's what I was about to press you on is you don't see a path for him getting 250 touches. He was top 5 and he was 4th in carries last year. How do you go from 4th in carries to nothing? It has to be the fumble thing. And so are you really going to bet on a great player getting completely benched, right, based on fumbles?
Right.
And look, we've seen that with guys. We have seen that with guys. I'm not saying that that's out of the realm of possibility either. There's really 2 downsides to the situation. It's the Washington offense and the lack of clarity on how the touch distribution is going to happen. So in Washington's offense, you talked about Carson Wentz. I don't think we can say that much just looking at Jonathan Taylor finishing as the RB1 overall with Wentz, checking it down to him and Nyheim Hines, who both had over 50 targets last year. I think it's completely reasonable for there to be enough passing volume to go around for Gibson and McKissick to be productive through the air and hit close, if not more than that 50 target range. And then the clarity on touches, we've talked about it. But my thing is, why is Brian Robinson, if everyone's so scared for Gibson, why is Brian Robinson still a 13th, 14th, 15th round pick? That's what's unfathomable to me. And it's the same thing as I've been preaching all offseason with Allen Lazard. Why is Allen Lazard wide receiver 41 where that's where he finished last year and Adams is gone? Same thing now. It's like, okay, everyone's expecting Gibson, who's falling to, in some cases, the 9th round. Then shouldn't that necessarily imply that we should be valuing Brian Robinson as a 11th, 10th round name to be that handcuff plus? So that's the question I pose to the fantasy community. And you're right. I don't want to react too much to the camp news. This happens every year. We never learn. Ronald Jones was told to be the guy by Bruce Arians for 2 consecutive off seasons, and we all fell for it again and again and again. I didn't, but everyone else did. And Gibson could just be in the doghouse right now, and that's over. Right? We saw that even with Brandon Ayuk last year. Shanahan was out on him for the first 6 to 8 weeks. They sit down, have a conversation, they hash it out. Ayuk is back to being that high upside, boom-bust machine that he was a rookie that we all thought he could be when he was drafted in the first round. I think they're going to continue to lean on Gibson if all remains constant and the fumbling issues get cleared up. They're going to lean on him like they have the last 2 years, which means he's going to be top 5 in carries, top 5 in red zone touches with another 50-plus targets. But, Alex, let's talk about some other dead zone running back names that you're into, right? Once we get past that J.K. Dobbins, Antonio Gibson, Josh Jacobs, Elijah Mitchell range, we started getting into names like A.J. Dillon, Chase Edmonds, Miles Sanders, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Kareem Hunt, Tony Pollard, Singletary, Harris, Penny. There's a long list of these guys. We'll put them on screen. But who are the dead zone names that if you're circling back, right, maybe you're doing a hero RB build or you go RB to start the draft and you smash on receiver for another 4, 5, 6 rounds, what are the names that you're looking at when you circle back at RB?
Yeah, something I've loved this year is actually I love the running back value in round 1 and 2, the top names. There's that tier of like ETN, Breece, Zeke, who I'm willing to take late in round 3. And if I don't get those guys, like I'm pretty much waiting. Like I'm good to pass on all the names we just talked about. And if they fall to a value, I'll take them in some cases. Or if I'm in a league where running backs are flying off the board and I feel desperate, I'll take one. Ideally, I don't have that happen. I just wait. But I love this late tier. There's a pocket of value around Chase Edmonds, Kareem Hunt, and even Tony Pollard to an extent. And then if you wait a couple more rounds, I actually like the values on Melvin Gordon, James Cook, even Rashad White and Dameon Pierce in that range. So I think at the higher end of that, you've got your Chase Edmonds in Miami. The appeal to him in a PPR league is like, no, he's probably not going to be a top 10 name, but he's a starting running back who right now is going as the RB26. Like a starting pass-catching running back in Miami going as the RB26. So I think he's a perfect name as your RB2 if you
I
get
think
some
Edmonds'
receiver
ceiling is
upside.
what we saw from Elijah Mitchell last year, where he's getting that 15 carries, 4 or 5 targets a game.
Absolutely. So I like Edmonds. Unfortunately, haven't gotten him in as many drafts as I would have liked because I think everyone else is in on him too. But Kareem Hunt is one of these names that's just, I feel like everyone is discrediting Kareem Hunt. They drafted Jerome Ford and Dearness Johnson was brought back, and there's all the news around the Browns right now. But Kareem Hunt was a top 8 running back the last time we saw him healthy for a full season back in 2020. And then in 2021, he was out producing Nick Chubb through the first 4 or 5 games of the season when he was fully healthy. So for the last 2 seasons, in the time that Kareem Hunt has been healthy on the field at the same time as Nick Chubb, in PPR formats, Kareem Hunt has been the more productive back, yet you're getting him 6, 7 rounds later than Nick Chubb. So I would rather wait in a PPR league, take Kareem Hunt, know that he's going to give you some upside every single week, and you can play him as an RB2 if you need to, but then there's always the upside. If Nick Chubb misses time, the touches and the volume goes through the roof for Hunt. So I actually like Hunt in that range. I'm surprised he's going this low. I don't know if people last year, because he was effective through the first 4 or 5 weeks, then was injured for so long, tried to come back from the injury and wasn't as effective. I feel like that left a bad taste in people's mouth. People called him washed. People just kind of forgot what happened. They see the moves of the team. But Kareem Hunt's still there. He requested a trade. They said no. And quite frankly, even if he does get traded, I believe in the talent. And I think if a team trades for Kareem Hunt, they're going to have a role for him. Like, they're not just going to trade for him to have him back somebody up. So I'm fine to take a shot on Kareem Hunt there. And he's one of my favorite late round names. And then if I'm going to pick one name from the later group, I like Melvin Gordon. We saw what he can do last year. I do expect Javonte to take over more. So if you're trying to play him every single week, he's probably not going to give you quite the production he did last year. But talk about a high-value handcuff. We saw explosiveness. We saw efficiency from Melgo last year. And I can't imagine a situation that would be better than Melvin Gordon's in Denver if Javonte Williams misses any time at all.
100%. And to add to your point on Kareem Hunt, Jacoby Brissett starting for the first 11 games. We saw him pepper Myles Gaskin. 63 targets last year to Myles Gaskin. You had another 20-plus targets to Duke Johnson, Salvon Ahmed, a couple other names that they were trying out at running back in Miami last year. But Brissett has shown us time and time again, whether he was in Indianapolis, whether he's in Miami, that he does check down to the running back. He's not anything more than like a pocket passer plus at absolute most. I love the check down volume in store for Kareem Hunt. And now without the contract, he has every reason to go out and prove himself, command that volume, and God forbid anything happen to Chubb. I know we keep bringing that up. It actually seems like every time Nick Chubb misses games, we all move Kareem Hunt into like top 5, top 10, and it doesn't happen.
Right.
But that upside, I think, is still there. It'd be silly for us to say that's completely out of the picture and irrelevant at this point. Even though their starting center got hurt, maybe out for the season, they're still a stud offensive line in Cleveland. And without much receiver weaponry, they're going to have to rely on Kareem Hunt in the pass game, especially where he's always been effective, which has been in the red zone and goal line situations. Love the thunder and lightning approach they take from my Brownies. And then the upside when Deshaun Watson comes back, where it could be an explosive offense. I'm not projecting that right out of the gate for Watson. This will probably be back half of the year getting the rust off. Everyone wants to say, oh, they can survive those 11 games and watch Watson make the playoffs. I don't see that in a loaded AFC North division. But I'm with you 100% on Kareem Hunt at value, especially if you go with a hero RB build or even a zero RB build. You can grab Kareem Hunt in those mid rounds in that dead zone and hope for the PPR goodness to follow. I think Pollard's going a little bit early right now, but I'm fine with him. Then I'm fading a lot of names like Damian Harris, Devin Singletary, which actually brings me to James Cook, who's going a little bit behind your Melvin Gordon at RB38 off the board right now. Smashing on James Cook everywhere I possibly can because he gives you that RB3 value where he can start the year off slow, but you're getting him so cheap that you're going to be loaded at the other positions. And then down the stretch, should James Cook come into form, be that PPR monster in the best offense in the NFL, and the Buffalo Bills, they run with high pace of play. They run 4 receivers wide a lot. This is a offense that you want pieces in, and we saw how hard the Bills have tried to get a pass catching back. They tried to trade for Christian McCaffrey. They tried to sign J.D. McKissick, and so for some reason Washington came begging him to rethink the decision. And they say, look, you know what? Let's just go about this the right way. Even though James Cook has a limited sample size in Georgia and is slightly undersized. Let's just get a guy who profiles in round 2 to be a pass-catching back. The Buffalo Bills front office, you and I have talked about, is making smart decision after smart decision. So I love going with James Cook as a guy that they ramp up over time. He can play that Zach Moss plus type of role. And if he does end up being this super explosive, hyper-efficient runner that he was at Georgia, there is plenty of upside for James Cook to be a high-end RB2, I believe, this year. Other names in this range, Darrell Henderson, I think is interesting. He's going super late, double-digit rounds right now. If you're out on Cam Akers, I think you have to be in on Henderson. And then Dameon Pierce, Rachaad White, James Robinson. So we talked about 2 rookies, same kind of thing. Dameon Pierce right now is getting the camp hype. Make sure you don't overextend yourself in picking up a rookie running back in potentially one of the worst offenses in the league. I know everyone loves Money Mills and the Texans, but let's be real. It's still Houston. J-Rob supposedly ready for week 1. Running routes in practice looks good. I'm still all over the ETN hype train, been leading that thing for a while. But J-Rob, I think, is a super interesting name, has handcuff value, could get some just carries, like be a 10 carry, 2 target a game type of name with some goal line in there as well. And the last name I'm looking at, and he keeps actually falling down draft boards, even though I've heard nothing but bad things against Miles Sanders, is Kenny Gainwell. And we've seen the coaching staff, they're starting to slowly hint, right? Again, we're not going to overreact to camp news, but they've been slowly hinting throughout this offseason that Kenneth Gainwell is the guy. They want to get him involved more. Sirianni's wearing a Kenneth Gainwell t-shirt to the press conference. They're just making these little hints that they like Gainwell, that like what he can do. You and I love Gainwell as a prospect. And even though everyone talks about rushing QBs not checking it down, and that is certainly true, we have seen Gainwell have some really, really strong performances. Even as a rookie, he's getting red zone and goal line usage over Miles Sanders. And even if it's a committee in Philly, which it typically ends up being anyways, if you just fade Eagles running backs, you're probably pretty happy right now. But getting Gainwell at RB46, super late, he has the handcuff appeal, he has the high-value touch appeal, right? This Leonard Fournette case study we always talk about. That's why Gainwell is interesting to me. And then you have some other handcuffs down the board like Isaiah Spiller. But Alex, let's talk about one more name before we sign off here. Ramondre Stevenson. Right now, still going 5 spots below Damian Harris and ADP, but Stevenson's been reportedly out of camp taking over the James White role at times. And we saw last year he was super efficient in the games that he took over, had monster games against some pretty stout defenses. We know Bill Belichick wants to run the ball, play good defense, establish that bully ball every week. So are you in on Ramondre at RB35, even RB31 where Harris is going? Because that's where I'm taking.
Yeah, really quickly, you mentioned Kenny Gainwell, but it's also, I just want to touch on that just for a second, because Jordan Howard had like over 80 carries last year. He's out of the way. Boston Scott, I think they re-signed Boston Scott, but there's no way he's getting over 80 carries again this season. And I was just looking at this. Did you know Boston Scott had the same amount of rushing touchdowns last season as Najee Harris? He had more than Dalvin Cook. He had 7 on 87 carries. So there's opportunity left for these Eagles backs. Even if it is a committee, a 2-man committee, it's going to be a lot better than if Boston Scott and Jordan Howard are involved. So back to Ramondre. I like him. I think it's interesting. He obviously, as a prospect, we were kind of out on him, and he proved us wrong. He proved that he slimmed down and was a better athlete than we gave him credit for. And he was a good pass catcher last season. I remember seeing him take screens to the house and, ripping off big chunk plays. It felt like left and right. New England wants to establish the run. Mac Jones is obviously hopefully going to take a step up this year, so the scoring opportunities could be there. Damian Harris had 16, 17 touchdowns last season, off the top of my head. Don't quote me on that. But I think there's going to be scoring opportunity in New England. It sure seems like Ramondre Stevenson is going to be at the least a 1B to Damian Harris's 1A this season. So I'm in on Ramondre. Now, in a lot of leagues I've been in, a lot of best ball drafts, people are reaching on him. His ADP is still climbing up. It's ahead of Damian Harris's at this point. Like, he's getting pulled forward more and more by the day. So if he's going to go in the 8th, 9th round, I'm probably out. But if he's going to fall to me in the 10th, 11th, 12th round with some of the names we're talking about, by all means I'm in, because he could take over the New England backfield And I know this is a committee backfield, but what we see time and time again from New England is if Bill Belichick has a guy that gets hot, he's going to keep feeding him the ball. So I think it could lead to some tremendous upside weeks from Ramondre if either Damian Harris is hurt, if he's in the doghouse for some reason, or if Ramondre is just getting hot with his touches, they'll keep feeding him the ball. So I'm in on him at ADP right now.
Well, Alex, I think that's it for today's show. If you guys like what we did here on the running backs, kind of going down the board, looking at some values, talking through some controversial players, if you want to see us do that at the wide receiver spot or any other positions, tight end, quarterback, you name it, let us know in the comments. A like and a sub, greatly appreciate it. If you like what we do here on the show, again, hit that free Discord link. Follow us on Twitter at DoubleMoveSport. We'll see y'all next time. Peace.